Today, I'm going to go really quick as best I can to leave a little bit of time for room for questions, but we're going to be diving into the heavy item in the room, which is stormwater recharge and the Southwestern approaches and case studies. Next slide, please. So we have to kind of set the stage a little bit. So where stormwater recharge fits in Arizona water, which many of us online are probably already aware of that. So I'm going to go pretty quick with that. But then I'm going to spend some time talking about kind of clarifying the various approaches of quote unquote stormwater recharge. Then I'll talk about how the flood control district has kind of progressed over the decades in allowing for more of these discussions and inclusions and ultimately projects that are implemented. And then we'll go into some of those examples and case studies. Next slide, please. So high level, all right, we know that the Central Arizona project delivers Colorado River water to the valley and is a very important water resource for 80% of the Arizona population. SRP. SRP, they mainly deal with the surface water within the local water riverways within Arizona. And they also are a major component in Arizona's water portfolio. Next slide, please. And then comes the municipalities that also have their own diverse water portfolios where they also incorporate groundwater and other sources. And it's primarily the municipalities that deal with some of the smaller, if you will, quote unquote, smaller water quantities that serve all of us of wherever we live. Next slide, please. We've been in a drought for now consecutively 24 years. Next slide, please. And the allocations associated with the Colorado River water are also likely going to get less and less as time goes on. Next slide, please. So that means we need to go about resolving our various water challenges within the Arizona water portfolio and improving resiliency with our water portfolio with different approaches. There's been a very solid effort for multiple decades, and I'm not going to go into all the idiosyncrasies of the great work from so many people in Arizona, being leaders in Arizona, championing these approaches back from the 1980s all the way to present that are still being championed today, but improvements in water efficiency, advancements in effluent reuse, small amounts of desalinization, improvements in groundwater access and underground water establishing underground water reserves for future use, and then also stormwater capture and reuse. This is a great image that I'm sure has been reverberated throughout multiple presentations from ADWR, and it shows kind of how it speaks to Arizona's resiliency on water utilization. Population has gone up and the relative water use has not. However, their population is still expected to go up and there will still be increasing challenges. So creating more resilient water sources, this is where we are. So on to the next slide, please. There was a study done in 2002 from the EPA as well in conjunction with other water agencies that looked at the potential of the case for stormwater capture throughout North America. And it kind of created this nice diagram of showing the different groups associated with this idea and implementation of stormwater capture in North America. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to get into stormwater recharge as a whole. So there are, I might say some statements here. This input, it's always open. Let's have deep discussions about it and kind of finesse the various terminology and or talking points on these various issues. It's important to note that stormwater recharge, I've found in my time in this realm, some folks might utilize this term very loosely, and it has a lot of gravity to it, thus the great turnout of people that we have on the line today. So it's important to understand, okay, what is it, how is it, what are the approaches, what is it not? So I just want to highlight stormwater recharge has kind of two different approaches. It's either with water credits or without water credits. And depending on that approach, it severely directs how the scope of work associated with those projects are implemented. If there are water credits, there will likely be more collaboration and direct involvement of municipalities that have the water rights associated to those to that water, which might leave some wiggle room for the potential of higher amounts of litigation. And then likely because the price is also increased, there will likely be less availability of that stormwater to be allocated towards portions for the natural environment. And then conversely, juxtaposed next to the stormwater recharge without water credits, less chance of litigation. Likely, though, there's more leeway to allow for some of that stormwater to be released and have some benefits for the natural environment. There's less steps associated with the water quality of it. There's still some questions on what PFAS and future regulations might be on that. It's typically less costly, and there's likely less direct involvement with municipalities. There still will be some type of involvement because most like the municipalities are the heavy hitters of who's served, but also, of course, you know, it's not just cities, it's also rural parts of Arizona are part of that equation as well. And I just also want to highlight, keep this in mind, stormwater recharge is likely different than underground storage, recharge facilities, wastewater recharge, managed aquifer recharge, habitat enhancement. Most of these established projects where you see these methods being implemented are not actually incorporating stormwater as part of their recharge. So keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So understand big water. Last kind of concept to grasp is big water versus small water. So in the stormwater recharge world, right, I've seen a handful, not a handful, but it happens just either in conversation or whatnot, where we might refer to GSI LID as a quote unquote stormwater recharge method. And when you go about saying that, you might get some pushback because stormwater recharge primarily is associated with water rights. And you might have to clarify. And it's kind of smaller. So what's the bang for the buck of the amount of project that you're doing? These are all kind of things that stew in your head as you're trying to go and have these conversations. Primarily, the bigger stormwater recharge associates strategies such as spreading, recharge basins, injection wells, floodmar, kind of large scale. And you'll see that these projects are roughly 1,000 plus acre feet per year, whereas the GSI strategies are significantly less than acre feet per year. And obviously, because of our audience, it's important to note that GSI does play a component in this. It is a vital tool in our toolbox that helps with infiltration and flood mitigation. So it is a tool to consider. Just keep that in mind when you're talking larger picture stormwater recharge. Next slide, please. I want to communicate that the district is aware of stormwater potential. And for multiple decades, there have been ongoing efforts dating all the way back to 1988 when the district did the very first kind of recharge feasibility study, which was a catalyst for a lot of SRP's own recharge efforts. So we have a long history of internal documents and ongoing efforts on understanding stormwater and managing it and finding ways to kind of make it more relevant in its inclusion in the future. Next slide, please. And with that, there's always ongoing studies that we're a part of trying to understand each and every passing study. There's new knowledge that's gained. This is from a mildly older study from 2018, but it's definitely relevant to this conversation. So the district did a study where it actually evaluated 8 FRS structures that the district owns, and it looked at the discharge from 4 different storm events over the course of a year. And it actually attempted to measure the volume of that stormwater that was being discharged. So I just want to mention, this to determine the volume of stormwater, it's a hard task to do, because primarily the functions of flood control look at peak volume management. And peak volume measurement is not an effective way to accurately calculate the total stormwater. It gives you a general ballpark, but it doesn't get you, you have to look at more or less the gauges at our structures and their discharge flows. And also, here's another variable. Many of our structures have multiple discharge locations depending on the flow rate. So all those things flow into this. So just asterisk, in order to assess total stormwater volume that can be collected and used, further studies must be conducted where data is collected from all structures at every discharge location for numerous stormwater events. Now that asterisk is done, let's get into what this study says. Next slide, please. So what the study found, again, from 4 rain events at 8 of our 22 dams in the course of 1 year, there was over 60,000 acre feet of conveyable water that moved through that system. That's a significant amount. Many of the towns and cities, their overarching annual allocated water supplies are significantly less than the 60,000 square foot that was conveyable from just from 8 structures. That's not including all the structures. Next slide, please. So again, the district is aware of the relative potential of stormwater utilization. We can crunch the numbers and figure out, okay, there's definitely some significant water here. It's just a matter of figuring out the other nuances, and you have to look at what other structures have done, what other strategies have been done, reflect on those. These are examples of underground storage or recharge facilities that don't actually incorporate stormwater recharge, but to the untrained eye, to the person who's not, relatively familiar with these things, they might correlate these, and you might have conflicts in discussion. So it's important to be prepared to have these discussions and to understand the differences. So Pima Mine Road recharge by the CAP and Seaguard, this is your traditional underground storage facility. It takes allocated water from the Colorado River and injects it into the ground for future use. You have the New River Agua River Underground Storage Project by SRP. This was an example of surface water, CAP water, and effluent water actually combined that serves a broader swath of Avondale, Chandler, Glendale, Peoria for future use. And then you have your Sweetwater recharge facility. This is a wastewater effluent facility by Tucson Water that it's important. It's an interesting thing to note that even though you have wastewater effluent and you're recharging in the ground, sometimes there's limitation and you have to supplement groundwater pumping to actually keep the turbidity levels down. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And then Riparian Preserve at the Water Ranch in the town of Gilbert, they utilize effluent as well, but they were able to combine the utilization of this effluent to make this recreational facility that provides phenomenal community amenities and diverse habitat for wildlife. So just these 4 or 5 that I've listed off, there's such a diverse array of how they're applied, and they're not even incorporating stormwater recharge. Next slide, please. Here are some that are incorporating it. So what's super exciting is that we do have Eleanor on the line, and Tucson has been such a champion in so many different ways, but this is a facility that was completed, I believe, in 2007, and it was a facility designed for the purpose of flood control while also capturing stormwater, managing it, infiltrating it, thinking about it for future use and providing environmental functions. And the main source of water for this structure, for this project, is stormwater. Now, granted, there had to be still some uh, uh, extra steps to make sure that Pima County Flood Control in Tucson, they had water rights associated with this to allow this to happen. But this is a phenomenal example. The KERP, I know many have already probably been to the site, and it would be wonderful to implement more of these. Next slide, please. Another similar project, but again, slightly different. This was an example at Cochise County. And the Cochise County, their flood control district is coupled with water conservation. So the Cochise County Flood Control District actually associates water rights within their everyday actions, which makes it easier for them to incorporate stormwater recharge in their flood control solutions. So this specific structure, it actually it utilizes a different type of basin structure in regards of basic basin, typical normal infiltration, a single chamber basin, and a dual chamber basin. And that's important because it's also kind of this mix of almost gray infrastructure associated with this stormwater recharge. But the primary focus was the reducing the water loss to evapotranspiration and mosquito management. Next slide, please. Okay, and then we get the Victoria Recharge Basin Project. This is another example of where there was an existing channel and they built these basins where there was maybe quote unquote excess irrigation water that might have been non-potable. And during larger events, they'd convey it into these basins so it wouldn't be lost and is incorporated within the recharge. And it has a permit for 1,800 acre feet. Next slide, please. And then lastly, here's an example where there's a stormwater recharge project that doesn't incorporate water rights. And this is a pilot study that's done by ADOT, actually off of Highway 89 up in Yavapai County. And they're looking at the various criteria and best management practices for mitigating kind of the runoff from the road and manage the mosquito kind of association. So anytime you have ponding, you always have to mitigate the 72-hour mosquito threat. That's not the correct verbiage for it, but they are utilizing dry wells. And dry wells have their own nuances in their maintenance and association of sometimes they might fill up with sediment and that you have to take maybe extra steps in going out there, maybe redigging it. So they're going to be piloting this for now and then on to the future. And it's a great example, again, of stormwater without water rights. So this water that's infiltrated is not incorporated in the portfolio of Prescott or Prescott Valley. It's primarily a flood control function while providing the functions of ADOT on a safe traveling corridor. Next slide, please. Many agencies are already doing much of this work. Next slide, please. So high-level conclusion, I'm getting on my little soapbox here, but I think it's important to again, continue these discussions. There are many tools in our toolbox, and stormwater recharge, just be aware that what you're talking about, if you throw in recharge, it might not actually be stormwater recharge, or from an optimistic point of view, there might be potential to, in the future, incorporate that stormwater recharge within the project. But you have to understand who you're talking to, understand the context, clarify what the strategies are. Water rights can be a scary thing. And depending on who you're talking to, and recharge might be a triggering topic. But don't fear, because most of these efforts have already been done. All right, so we've already implemented this before. You can kind of take the edge off a little bit. You can provide these examples. They've been functioning for almost 2 decades now in many of these examples. Other recharge methods likely might not incorporate the stormwater recharge. So keep that in mind, understand some of the terminology that you're using. And GSI, LID, of course they have significance, and they will continue to have significance. They do improve infiltration and they do provide flood mitigation. Will they immediately address the 100-year peak flood event. There's challenges to that, and you'll have to be able to address those challenges on those conversations. But they do have significance. And then lastly, we just thank you for the time. We have to continue these talks and communications and allow for the various departments that we all work for and different agencies to continue to have these talks. Here's my plug. The district does have a capital improvement project program and can be utilized to help fund some of these projects into the future. Municipalities, please reach out. All right.